So you see the banner, see what this video is going to be about. Should Jake DeBrusk get traded? And listen, last season he was fantastic for the Bruins when he was on the ice. This year has not been a similar situation. He is underperformed. Now he's making $4 million per year. This is the last year of his deal. If you remember, he's kind of signed that bridge deal to kind of hopefully make more money in the long run, but it doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. And DeBrusk got some comments about his future in Boston, which were very interesting. This is what he had to say. I mean, of course, I do worry. DeBrusk admitted when asked if the current situation is making him a bit unnerved about this year's trade deadline. I mean, I understand and I feel like I've been around here long enough to know how the league works in the sense of things. And obviously there's different things like guys getting injured around the league and different stuff that kind of happens that is out of normal control. It'll be interesting to see what teams are aggressive, what teams aren't. But of course, you always have that in the back of your mind. I mean, there's obviously 2 years ago was a little bit more intense on that side of things, but I think ever since I've been here, I've been worried. So let's just kind of go right into it, man. DeBrusk has had, for what we expected going into it, kind of a mediocre year. In 58 games played, 13 goals, 14 assists for 27 points. Now, if you recall last year, in 64 games played, he had 27 goals, 23 assists for 50 points. But let's not fool ourselves. This was the flash in the pan season for him as a Bruin. Now, you could argue the 42 points the season prior. I mean, he started to show progression. But I think Jake DeBrusk at most is going to be around a 40, 50-point guy. He's never going to be that first-round draft pick status. But Bruins fans were excited. I mean, I was excited. Like, okay, maybe this guy can eventually become like a 60, 70-point guy. But he's just too hot and cold. He's too streaky. He's not consistent enough. And there was some genuine question marks you had. I mean, was he more of a product of the centers that he played with? Was he more of a product of Bergeron? Was he more of a product when Krejci when he sometimes played with him as well? You know, that was the honest-to-God conversation. And I think, honestly, yeah, it does seem like that to be the case. I think he's effective. I think a 40-point guy is always going to have a role in the NHL, but there's no way he's ever going to get some massive type of contract. And I mean, even his trade value at this point, what is a team really going to be willing to give up for a guy like Jake DeBrusk? I mean, his ceiling is probably around 40, 50 points. And that's respectable. That's a good NHLer. But for what he wanted prior and previous conversation with the Bruins, I mean, I don't see him making much more than $4 million, if at all more than $4 million. You can find guys that score around 30, 40 points and possibly 50 points around the $3 to $4 million marker. When I look at the Bruins, right, and I've had this conversation about them overall as a team, I think they're a very solid team. I think they have their holes in their roster. But more importantly, when you look at the draft coming up, they don't have a draft pick at all in the first 3 rounds. And then next season, in 2025 draft, they don't have a second or a 4th round pick. The Bruins, I should call them the Bergerons, but that's pretty much what they were. The Bruins gave up a lot of future assets to win now, to be in a situation where they can compete. Do you move a guy like Jake DeBrusk, who might get you a 3rd rounder, possibly a 2nd rounder, depending how desperate the team is, or maybe how that team's like they put him in a certain role and they can maximize him as a player. But I think for me, I don't know if you would get enough value back from Jake DeBrusk to even make sense dealing him. Now, if you could kind of move a package, involve DeBrusk in a package to get a guy like Noah Hanifin, for example, which they've been tied to in rumors, I would be completely fine with that. But when you look at the Bruins depth chart, you know, you get rid of a guy like DeBrusk, and a lot of Bruins fans do have problems with him. Who's going to slot in that top 6 role and fit admirably? I mean, you could argue you put Frederic up there, who's had a little bit more production. Maybe you expand his role, and maybe he could be that, 50, 60-point guy in the second-line role. I mean, maybe you give that a shot. But, there are some question marks with the Bruins, and if you get rid of a guy like DeBrusk, who, when he's playing well and when he's skating, he is effective, do you feel confident enough in his particular role that he can come in, that a player in the AHL can come in and fit in the 3rd, 4th line, and you bump a guy like Frederic up in the 2nd line and still not miss a beat? That's the honest to God question. So for me, when I look at the Bruins and the Jake DeBrusk rumors and how things are going to pan out in the long run, this is just my honest to God perspective. It would make no sense to move Jake DeBrusk at this point because I don't think there's a great internal option. I mean, even a third line role, like let's say you move Frederic up because he's had a pretty good season. Who in the AHL do you feel confident enough that can replace him? Unless you're moving DeBrusk in a package to get Hanifin and maybe like a bottom 6 NHL player, I'm not really sure. Unless you get a team that's really high on him and they think last season is what he should be, and you could justify, trading DeBrusk for like a second or third round pick, I'm not too sure, right? And you could argue draft picks aren't always a sure thing. A lot of draft picks never get into the NHL, so you're trading a proven NHL for a draft pick, but also teams hold those assets in high regard because they think like, hey, a second or third round pick, that should be a good quality NHLer if things work out. So does Jake DeBrusk get traded? No. Should he get traded? No. Do I think the Bruins should re-sign him? The only way it makes sense for the Bruins to re-sign Jake DeBrusk is if the contract's reasonable. If he's asking for another $4 million contract, I mean, I'm not mad at that, but I don't know. I think, unless he proves me wrong, and I actually hope he proves me wrong, I just think Jake DeBrusk is like a 40, 50-point guy at most, and you don't want to overpay for those type of guys because then that can make building your roster and building a contender far more difficult. But I'd like to know your thoughts down below in the comments section. Do you believe Jake DeBrusk should be traded, or do you think the Bruins should re-sign him? And if you do want the Bruins to re-sign him, what should be the cap hit? Let me know down below in the comment section. I'm Captain Paul. I'll see you in the next one.